The die is cast. We have finally arrived at the moment that sane voices in the West have warned about for years, and the insane voices in Washington and London have been blindly rushing toward. The authorization by the United States and the United Kingdom to allow the regime in Kyiv to fire ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles deep into the internationally recognized territory of the Russian Federation is not a strategy. It is not a military solution. It is a suicide pact. It is the frantic, hysterical act of a dying political class that realizes it has lost the war on the ground, and so it has decided to risk the survival of human civilization rather than admit defeat. We are watching the final catastrophic collapse of the post-Cold War order. And the people leading us are arsonists standing in a pool of gasoline, flicking matches. Let's be absolutely clear about what has happened here. This is not about helping Ukraine. Ukraine is finished. The nation we knew is gone. Its armies have been destroyed, its infrastructure pulverized, and its population displaced or dead. This decision to launch NATO-guided, NATO-targeted, and NATO-facilitated missiles into Russia is a direct act of war by the West against Moscow. Vladimir Putin understands this perfectly. His immediate update to the Russian nuclear doctrine is not a bluff. It is a statement of fact. He has lowered the threshold for nuclear use specifically to address this scenario where a non-nuclear proxy state is used by nuclear powers to strike Russia's strategic assets. If you think he won't respond, you are suffering from the same delusional psychosis that infects the Pentagon and the State Department. The party is over. The delusion that we could bleed Russia without bleeding ourselves has evaporated. For 2 years, I have sat here and told you that the Russians play chess while we play checkers, but even that analogy fails now. We aren't playing a game anymore. We are looking down the barrel of a gun. The neoconservatives in Washington, the globalists in London, and the sycophants in Brussels have crossed the final red line. They believe that because Russia has shown restraint, strategic patience, that Russia is weak. They mistake adult behavior for weakness because they themselves are children. They are children playing with loaded weapons, completely ignorant of the blast radius. This conflict was never about freedom or democracy. It was always about the destruction of Russia as a sovereign, independent power that refused to bow to the hegemonic dictates of the financial oligarchy in the West. And that project has failed. It has failed miserably. The reality on the ground is defined by one thing and one thing only: attrition. You can have all the narratives you want on CNN and the BBC. You can have all the flag waving and the virtue signaling. But war is about math. It is about physics. It is about industrial capacity. And on every single one of these metrics, the West has lost. Look at the attrition math. It is horrific. We are looking at casualty ratios that are unsustainable for any nation, let alone one as demographically compromised as Ukraine. We are seeing ratios of 7-1, sometimes 10-1, in favor of the Russians in the artillery duels. Why? Because the Russians built a military designed for high-intensity industrial-scale warfare. We built a military designed to bully goat herders in the Middle East and enrich defense contractors in Northern Virginia. The Russians fire 60, 70,000 artillery shells a day. The Ukrainians, even with all of NATO's help, struggled to fire 5,000 or 6,000. You cannot spin that. You cannot public relations your way out of an artillery barrage. The Ukrainian army that existed in February 2022 is dead. The army that we built up for the counteroffensive in 2023 is dead. What is left now are press gangs dragging old men and young boys off the streets of Kyiv and Odessa, throwing them into trenches with 3 days of training, and waiting for the Russian thermobaric rockets to liquidate them. This is not war. This is murder. And the moral responsibility for this slaughter lies directly in the Oval Office and at number 10 Downing Street. By escalating now, by giving the green light for deep strikes, we are not saving Ukraine. We are ensuring that whatever is left of it will be turned into a glass parking lot. The strategic incompetence here is breathtaking. The Pentagon knows the ATACMS cannot change the outcome of the war. General Brown knows it. The intelligence community knows it. These missiles are tactical ballistic missiles. They are annoying to the Russians, yes. They can kill people, yes. But they cannot alter the strategic equation. Russia is the largest country on Earth. It has strategic depth that European nations cannot comprehend. Firing a few dozen or even a few hundred missiles into Russia will not break their will. It will only harden it. It validates everything Putin has told his people, that the West is out to destroy them. We have done the one thing you should never do in war. We have unified our enemy and given them the moral high ground in the eyes of their own population and the global South. We are witnessing a failure of doctrine and leadership that rivals the worst disasters in military history. This is not about a lack of courage on the part of the Ukrainian soldier. God knows they have fought with a bravery that their leaders do not deserve. This is a failure of generalship and a failure of political oversight. We have a political class in the West that is totally detached from the reality of violence. They have no skin in the game. Their children aren't in the trenches in the Donbass. They sit in air-conditioned offices, look at spreadsheets, and think they can manage war like a hedge fund. They think they can calibrate escalation. We'll give them HIMARS, but only with this range. Then we'll give them tanks, but only a few. Then F-16 seconds. Now ATACMS. It is gradualism, the same sickness that lost us Vietnam. But the Russians don't do gradualism. They do operations. They do strategy. While we were debating whether to send tanks, the Russians were building 3 lines of defense the size of Western Europe. While we were talking about sanctions, the Russians were putting their economy on a war footing, running their factories 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They are producing more ammunition in a month than the entire NATO alliance produces in a year. That is the reality. And no amount of long-range missiles is going to change the fact that we have run out of stuff and we have run out of men. The trap has been set and we have walked right into it. By authorizing these strikes, we have given Russia the justification to take the gloves off completely. Until now, the Russians have actually been fighting with one hand tied behind their back. They have avoided hitting certain command and control centers in Kyiv. They have avoided decapitating the political leadership. That is over now. If an ATACMS missile, guided by U.S. satellites and programmed by U.S. personnel, hits a Russian city or a nuclear radar station, the response will be systemic. We are inviting a level of retaliation that our air defense systems simply cannot handle. We have poked the bear for the last time, and now the bear is coming out of the cave, and we are standing there with a slingshot wondering why our deterrence failed. This failure of deterrence is rooted in a much deeper, more systemic rot. It stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what war actually is in the 21st century. The West is still fighting the ghosts of World War II. We are obsessed with maneuver warfare. The idea that you can use speed, surprise, and shock to dislocate the enemy and force a collapse without having to grind through his main forces. This is the Blitzkrieg myth, the Desert Storm fantasy. We trained the Ukrainians in this doctrine. We told them to form armored columns, to drive Leopards and Bradleys through minefields, believing that the Russians would simply panic and run away at the sight of NATO hardware. We convinced ourselves that the Russian soldier was a demoralized conscript who would abandon his post the moment he saw a German tank. It was a lie. It was a lethal delusion. In the age of ubiquitous overhead surveillance, maneuver is dead. You cannot surprise anyone anymore. The battlefield is transparent. Between satellites, commercial drones, and electronic warfare sensors, anything that moves is seen, and anything that is seen is killed. The Russians understood this years ago. While we were wasting trillions on F-35 seconds that can't fly in the rain and literal combat ships that crack in the water, the Russians were building a reconnaissance strike complex designed to destroy anything that emits a signal or turns an engine on. When the Ukrainians tried to apply our maneuver doctrine during the failed counteroffensive, they drove straight into a wall of steel. They were obliterated before they even saw the first line of Russian trenches. We are witnessing the triumph of firepower and attrition over maneuver. This is not 1,944, this is 1,916 with drones. It is the Somme, it is Verdun. But with the lethality dialed up by a factor of 100, the Russian doctrine is based on mathematics and physics. They do not care about taking a village for a photo opportunity on Monday only to lose it on Tuesday. They care about the destruction of the enemy force. They pull back, they let the Ukrainians advance into a fire sack, and then they unleash hell. They trade space for time and enemy blood. This is the Soviet deep battle concept modernized for the electronic age. They grind, they pulverize, they create kill zones where nothing biological can survive. And the West has no answer for this. We don't have the ammunition stocks to fight this way. We don't have the industrial capacity to replace the barrels that melt from sustained fire. We built a military for short, sharp interventions against third-rate powers, and now we are smashing it against a peer competitor that is prepared for the long haul. The tragedy is that there's nobody in Washington or London capable of understanding this reality. Look at the people in charge. Look at the National Security Council. Look at the State Department. Look at the Ministry of Defense in the UK. Who are these people? They are lawyers. They are social scientists. They are political appointees who have spent their entire lives in the echo chamber of academia and the think tank swamp. They have degrees in international relations, in human rights law, in diversity and inclusion. They do not have degrees in engineering, in ballistics, or in military history. They have never heard a shot fired in anger. They have never seen what a 152 millimeter artillery shell does to a human body. These people view war as a policy debate. They think you can manage a conflict the way you manage a litigation strategy or a PR campaign. They believe in the power of the narrative. They think that if they say Russia is losing enough times on television, it will somehow become true. They treat military force as just another lever of diplomatic pressure to be dialed up and down like a thermostat. If we send the ATACMs, it sends a signal. War is not about signaling. War is about compelling your enemy to do your will through the application of overwhelming violence. When you launch a missile into Russia, you aren't sending a memo. You are killing Russians. And the Russians don't respond with memos. They respond with kinetic force. This intellectual bankruptcy at the top is why we are in this mess. A competent strategist, someone grounded in realism, would have looked at the map of Ukraine, looked at the demographics, looked at the Russian industrial base, and said on day one, we cannot win a conventional war here. We must negotiate. But because these people are ideologues, because they are driven by a hatred of Russia that borders on the pathological, they refuse to look at the facts. They replaced strategy with wishful thinking. They ignored the advice of the few remaining competent officers who warned that a war of attrition would destroy NATO's stockpiles and break the Ukrainian army. Instead of listening to the engineers and the soldiers, they listened to the lobbyists and the neocons. They bought into the end of history arrogance, the belief that Western liberalism is inevitable and that any nation standing in its way is just a temporary glitch. They viewed Russia not as a great power with legitimate security interests, but as a gas station masquerading as a country, led by a man they dismissed as a thug. They underestimated the Russian culture, the Russian history of resilience, and the Russian capacity for suffering. They projected their own weakness onto their enemy. They thought sanctions would cause a coup in Moscow because, in the West, if the price of iPhones goes up, people riot. They didn't understand that the Russian people view this war as existential. They are fighting for the survival of their motherland, while we are fighting for the globalist aspirations of a detached elite. And now, having failed on the battlefield, having failed to bankrupt the Russian economy, having failed to isolate Putin globally, these incompetent leaders are doubling down. It is the gambler's fallacy. They have lost the house, the car, and the kids' college fund, and now they are putting the deed to the country on the table for one last spin of the wheel. The authorization of these long-range strikes is not a military decision. It is a political tantrum. It is the lash out of a ruling class that is terrified of being held accountable for the disaster they have created. They would rather risk World War III than admit they were wrong. They would rather see Europe burn than admit that Donald Trump was right when he said we should get along with Russia. This disconnect between the political leadership and military reality is the most dangerous variable in the world today. In the Cold War, even the hawks understood the concept of mutually assured destruction. They respected the nuclear threshold. Today, we have people in power who talk about tactical nuclear exchanges as if they are discussing a tax hike. They have normalized the unthinkable because they have no respect for the weapon systems they control. They are like children playing with matches in a dynamite factory, convinced that because the factory hasn't exploded yet, it never will. They are wrong. The fuse is burning, and it is much shorter than they think. Let's look under the hood of this disaster. How did the most expensive military alliance in history, NATO, led by a Pentagon with an $800 billion annual budget, get humiliated by a country with a defense budget a fraction of that size? The answer is uncomfortable, but it is undeniable: systemic institutional corruption. The American military establishment is no longer designed to win wars. It is designed to sustain itself. It is designed to move money from the Treasury into the pockets of defense contractors, and to move general officers from the Pentagon into board seats at Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing. We do not have a warfighting machine. We have a self-licking ice cream cone. The promotion system in the United States military is broken. We have purged the warfighters and retained the bureaucrats. If you are a maverick, a tactical genius, or someone who speaks hard truths to power, your career is dead. You will retire as a colonel or a major. To become a general or an admiral today, you must be a politician. You must toe the party line. You must repeat the approved narratives about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have generals who are more concerned with pronouns than they are with propulsion. We have admirals who are more worried about carbon footprints than fleet readiness. This culture of conformity has produced a leadership class that is risk-averse, unimaginative, and totally incapable of adapting to the brutal realities of modern high-intensity conflict. This corruption of purpose is mirrored in the corruption of the military-industrial complex. We build weapons that are too complex, too fragile, and astronomically expensive. We don't build them because they are the best tool for the job. We build them because they maximize profit margins for the prime contractors. Look at the equipment we sent to Ukraine. It has been an absolute embarrassment. The M1 Abrams tank, we were told this was the beast of the battlefield, the invincible chariot of democracy. What happened? It got there, it got stuck in the mud because it's too heavy, its turbine engine sucked in dust and debris, and then it got picked off by a $500 FPV drone. We sent a $70 million tank to be destroyed by a toy you can buy on Amazon. Look at the Patriot air defense system. For years, I warned that the Patriot was overrated. It failed in Saudi Arabia against Houthi Scud missiles from the 1,970 seconds. Now, in Ukraine, we are seeing the undeniable truth. It cannot protect the skies. The Russians have systematically hunted down and destroyed Patriot batteries using their own superior electronic warfare and missile technology. We are firing $2 million interceptors at $20,000 drones, and we are running out of interceptors. The economic asymmetry is destroying us. We are bankrupting ourselves trying to defend indefensible airspace while the Russians are producing cheap, effective, mass-produced munitions that overwhelm our systems. While we were focused on maximizing shareholder value for defense stocks, the Russians were focused on physics and engineering. They prioritized lethality over profitability. The result is a terrifying technological gap that the West refuses to acknowledge. Russia possesses hypersonic missile technology that we simply do not have and cannot defend against. The Kinzhal and the Zircon missiles are game changers. They fly at Mach 9 or Mach 10. They maneuver in flight. There is no air defense system in the NATO arsenal, not the Patriot, not NASAMS, not IRIS-T that can stop them. When the Russians want to hit a target, they hit it. We have no shield. The carrier strike groups, the pride of the U.S. Navy, are now floating targets. In a real war with Russia, those carriers would have to stay thousands of miles away from the coast, rendering their aircraft useless or risk being sent to the bottom of the ocean in the first 20 minutes of the conflict. This is the reality that the generals in the Pentagon whisper about in the hallways, but dare not say in front of a congressional committee. We have fallen behind. We spent 2 decades chasing goat herders in sandals around the Hindu Kush, fighting a low-tech counterinsurgency. We atrophied. Our industrial base withered away. We outsourced our manufacturing capabilities. We shut down our foundries. Meanwhile, Russia and China watched us. They studied our way of war. They saw our reliance on satellites, on comms, on air superiority, and they built specific countermeasures to dismantle our advantages. Now, we are seeing the collision of a hollow force against a hard force. The NATO equipment in Ukraine is burning, the Leopard tanks from Germany burning, the Challengers from the UK burning, the Bradleys burning. This is a massive commercial advertisement for the failure of Western military technology. The world is watching. India is watching. Turkey is watching. Saudi Arabia is watching. They are seeing that the emperor has no clothes. They are seeing that Russian equipment is rugged, reliable, and effective, while Western equipment is fragile, maintenance heavy, and fails under combat conditions. This is not just a military defeat. It is the collapse of the Western brand. And what is the response from the West? Denial. More money. We need another $60 billion. For what? To buy more of the same junk that just failed? To line the pockets of the same CEOs who presided over this failure? There is no accountability. If a general loses a war, he gets a promotion. If a defense program goes 10 years over schedule and $1 trillion over budget, like the F-35 Congress just votes for more funding, it is a racketeering scheme masquerading as national defense. And the Ukrainians are the ones paying the price in blood. We are feeding them into a meat grinder to test our weapons and clear out our old inventory so we can buy new, more expensive toys. It is cynical, it is immoral, and it is strategically suicidal. We have reached a point of industrial exhaustion. We cannot produce 155 millimeter shells fast enough. We are scouring the globe, begging South Korea, begging Japan, trying to buy back ammo we sold years ago. It is pathetic. Russia is outproducing the entire collective West combined in artillery ammunition. Think about that. The combined GDP of NATO is 30 times that of Russia, yet they can outproduce us in the most critical commodity of modern war. That tells you everything you need to know about the inefficiency and corruption of our system. We have a financialized economy, not an industrial one. We can print money, but we cannot print shells. We can create derivatives, but we cannot create explosives. And in a war of attrition, the side that can manufacture real, tangible steel and fire wins. The technological superiority of the West was a myth maintained by fighting weak enemies. Now that we are fighting a peer, the myth is shattered. The Russians have jammed our GPS-guided munitions. The Excalibur rounds, useless. The HIMARS accuracy degraded. They adapt. They evolve. We are stuck in a rigid, bureaucratic dogma that cannot pivot. We are watching the demilitarization of NATO in real time. We have emptied our stockpiles to support a lost cause. And now, as we face the prospect of a direct conflict with Russia, we are naked. We have no ammo, no tanks, no air defense, and a recruitment crisis that means we have no soldiers. And yet, the political leadership wants to escalate. They want to fire missiles deep into Russia. It is madness. It is the behavior of a gambler who knows the game is rigged against him but refuses to leave the table until he has lost his life. We are now transitioning from military defeat to existential peril. The disaster in Ukraine is bad enough on its own terms, the loss of life, the waste of treasure, the destruction of a nation. But what is happening now, with the authorization of deep strikes into Russia, is forcing us toward a threshold that once crossed cannot be uncrossed. To understand why the Russians are reacting with such fury and why they have updated their nuclear doctrine, you have to understand the history that the Western media refuses to report. This crisis did not start in 2022. It did not start in 2014. It started in 2002. That was the year the George W. Bush administration, driven by the same neoconservative cabal that is in power today, unilaterally withdrew the United States from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. This was the cornerstone of strategic stability between the superpowers. It ensured that neither side could build a shield that would make them immune to a retaliatory strike. It guaranteed mutually assured destruction, which paradoxically guaranteed peace. When we walked away from that treaty, we sent a clear message to Moscow. We intend to dominate you. We intend to build a shield so we can strike you with a sword without fear of retaliation. Vladimir Putin warned us then. He said clearly that this was a mistake of historic proportions. He said that if the US built a global missile defense system, Russia would be forced to develop asymmetric weapons to penetrate that shield. He begged the West to listen. We didn't. We laughed. We called Russia a dying power. We proceeded to place missile defense installations in Poland and Romania, the so-called Aegis Ashore sites. We lied to the Russians and told them these were to protect Europe from Iranian missiles. The Russians knew it was a lie. You don't put interceptors in Poland to stop missiles from Tehran. You put them there to neutralize the Russian nuclear deterrent. So Russia did exactly what they said they would do. They went to work. While we were wasting trillions on nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan, Russian engineers were developing the next generation of strategic delivery systems. In 2018, Putin unveiled them. The West laughed again. They called them cartoons. They said it was bluffing. Well, who is laughing now? The Russians developed the avant-garde hypersonic glide vehicle. It sits on top of an ICBM, travels at 27 times the speed of sound, and maneuvers like a cruise missile. It is physically impossible to intercept. We have zero defense against it. They developed the Poseidon, an autonomous, nuclear-powered underwater drone the size of a school bus. It carries a multi-megaton warhead. It can travel across the ocean undetected, sit off the coast of New York or London, and detonate, creating a radioactive tsunami that would wipe out the eastern seaboard. They developed the Burevestnik, the Skyfall, a nuclear-powered cruise missile with practically unlimited range. It can circle the globe for days, skirt around our defenses, and strike from any direction. This is the fruit of our arrogance. The withdrawal from the ABM treaty forced Russia to innovate, and now they possess a strategic arsenal that is vastly superior to ours. We are still relying on Minuteman III missiles from the 1,970 seconds. They have the Sarmat, the Satan II, which can carry 10 or 15 heavy warheads and deploy decoys that make our missile defense look like a joke. We broke the balance of terror, and Russia restored it with a vengeance. Now, bring this history to the present moment. The decision to allow Ukraine to fire ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles is not just about those specific missiles. It is about the infrastructure required to launch them and the precedent it sets. But there is an even darker reality lurking behind this: the return of intermediate-range missiles to Europe and the Pacific. The United States is deploying the Typhon system. This system uses the Mk-41 vertical launch system. Why does that matter? Because the Mk-41 is a dual-use launcher. It can fire a defensive interceptor, or it can fire a Tomahawk cruise missile. Here is the nightmare scenario that keeps Russian strategic planners awake at night. The Tomahawk missile can carry a conventional high-explosive warhead, or it can carry a nuclear W-80 warhead. On a radar screen, they look exactly the same. They fly at the same speed. They have the same radar cross-section. If a salvo of missiles is launched from a NATO base in Poland or Romania, or from a Typhoon battery in Germany, heading toward Moscow or a Russian nuclear silo, The Russian leadership has a matter of minutes, perhaps 5 or 6 minutes, to decide what those missiles are. Are they conventional? Is it just an attack on a radar station? Or is it a decapitation strike? Is it a sneak attack designed to take out their leadership before they can respond? In that window of time, with the survival of their nation at stake, they cannot afford to guess. They have to assume the worst. They have to assume those are nuclear tipped tomahawks. And their doctrine, their imperative, dictates a launch on warning response. This means they empty their silos before the incoming missiles hit. This is how the world ends. Not with a grand proclamation, but with a misunderstanding caused by the reckless placement of ambiguous weapons on the enemy's border. This is the context for Putin's updated nuclear doctrine. He has explicitly stated that any attack on Russia by a non-nuclear state, Ukraine that is supported or facilitated by a nuclear state, the US, UK, or France, will be treated as a joint attack. He is removing the ambiguity. He is telling Washington, do not hide behind your proxy. If you guide a missile into my territory that threatens my strategic security, I will hold you responsible and I will respond against you. The neocons in Washington think this is a bluff because they project their own lack of resolve onto Putin. They think he didn't nuke us when we sent the tanks. He didn't nuke us when we sent the HIMARS, so he won't nuke us now. This is known as salami slicing. You cut the salami slice by slice, thinking the other guy won't react to just one thin slice. But eventually, you have eaten the whole salami. Eventually, you cross a line where the existential threat becomes intolerable. We are targeting their early warning radars. Ukraine, using drones, has already attempted to strike the over-the-horizon radars that Russia uses to detect a nuclear attack. This is suicidal insanity. If you blind a nuclear power, you force them to be paranoid. If they cannot see what is coming, they are much more likely to shoot first out of fear. We are poking the eyes of a bear while holding a knife to its throat, and we act surprised when it roars. The betrayal of the ABM treaty was the first domino. The expansion of NATO was the second. The coup in Kyiv in 2014 was the third. And now, the authorization of deep strikes is the final domino before the collapse. We have systematically dismantled every guardrail that kept the Cold War cold. We have torn up the INF Treaty. We have torn up the Open Skies Treaty. We have suspended New START dialogue. There is no communication. There is no trust. There is only a loaded gun pointed at the head of the world. The people in the Pentagon and the White House are sleepwalking into a nuclear exchange. They are treating these red lines as if they are political talking points to be spun by the press secretary. They do not understand the physics of nuclear warfare. They do not understand that once the birds fly, there is no calling them back. There is no limited nuclear war. That is a fantasy concocted by Rand Corporation theorists. If one nuke goes off, they all go off. And thanks to the genius of our leadership over the last 20 years, Russia now has the capacity to ensure that even if we strike first, we will die second. They have built the doomsday machine that we forced them to build. And now, like petulant children, we are daring them to turn the key. The military defeat in Ukraine is the catalyst for a political collapse that will sweep across the Western world like a tsunami. History teaches us that when great powers lose wars, especially wars they foolishly provoked and arrogantly assumed they would win, the consequences are never confined to the battlefield. They shatter the legitimacy of the ruling class at home. We are already seeing the cracks in the foundation. Look at Europe. The German government is collapsing. The French government is paralyzed. The British conservatives have been obliterated. Why? Because they lied to their populations. They told their citizens that sanctions would crush the Russian economy, that Ukraine would win, and that the cost of living crisis was a necessary sacrifice for democracy. The truth is now undeniable. The sanctions did not destroy Russia. They destroyed the industrial base of Europe. German industry, the engine of the continent, is shutting down. Companies are fleeing to China or the United States because energy costs are too high. The Europeans committed economic suicide at the behest of Washington. cutting themselves off from cheap Russian gas to buy expensive American LNG. They impoverished their own working class to fund a proxy war that has failed, and now the bill is coming due. The voters are waking up. They are realizing that their leaders care more about the borders of Ukraine than they do about the borders of their own nations or the heating bills of their own pensioners. In the United States, we are facing a sovereign debt crisis of apocalyptic proportions. We are $35 trillion in debt. We are paying more in interest on that debt than we spend on defense. And yet, the Uni Party in Washington wants to send another $100 billion to Kyiv. They want to rebuild Ukraine when we cannot even maintain our own bridges or secure our own southern border. This disconnect is unsustainable. You cannot have an empire abroad and a democracy at home. We have chosen empire, and we are bankrupting the nation to sustain it. The global south sees this weakness. The BRICS alliance is expanding. The world is de-dollarizing because they no longer trust the United States to be a neutral arbiter of the financial system. We have weaponized the dollar, and in doing so, we have accelerated the end of American financial hegemony. The tragedy is that this entire disaster was avoidable if we had simply honored our promises not to expand NATO, if we had simply implemented the Minsk agreements, if we had treated Russia with the respect due to a great power. None of this would have happened. Ukraine would still be whole. Hundreds of thousands of men would still be alive. Europe would still be prosperous. But the arrogance of the neoconservatives would not allow it. They demanded total submission, and instead, they have delivered total defeat. We have reached the end of the road. There are no more off-ramps. The choice facing the West today is stark and binary. Option 1, we accept reality. We admit that the project in Ukraine has failed. We stop the escalation. We pick up the phone, which we should have done 2 years ago, and we call Moscow. We negotiate a settlement that recognizes Russia's legitimate security interests, likely resulting in a neutral Ukraine and the recognition of the new territorial realities. This will be humiliating for the NATO leadership. It will be a bitter pill to swallow, but it will save what is left of Ukraine, and it will save the world from a nuclear holocaust. Option 2, we continue to live in denial. We double down. We launch the missiles. We force Russia to strike back. We trigger Article 5. And we slide uncontrollably into a global war that we cannot win and from which we will not recover. If we choose this path, there will be no history books to record our stupidity, because there will be no one left to write them. The American people need to understand that the people currently in charge in Washington are not capable of fixing this. They are the ones who broke it. They are intellectually compromised, morally bankrupt, and completely detached from reality. They will not change course voluntarily. They must be removed from power. We need a complete cleaning of the House. We need to fire the generals who haven't won a war in 30 years. We need to fire the diplomats who think diplomacy is about lecturing other nations on their domestic policies. We need to dismantle the national security state that has lied to us about Iraq, about Afghanistan, about Libya, about Syria, and now about Ukraine. We need adults in the room. We need leaders who understand that the purpose of the U.S. military is to defend the United States, not to police the world or subsidize the defense of wealthy Europeans who hate us. We need a return to realism, to national interest, and to sanity. The hour is late, the fuse is burning, we are standing on the precipice of the abyss, and the wind is blowing at our backs. It is time to stop, turn around, and walk back from the edge before these fools turn the lights out on Western civilization forever.